Hi, I'm Jonah McDonald, and this is Living History. I'm the author of Secret Atlanta, a guide to the weird, wonderful, and obscure. But today, I'm not going to be telling you the human stories of Atlanta. Instead, we are going to explore Atlanta's natural history. And what better place to start than the Fernbank Museum of Natural History? Today, we're going to go back further than the dinosaurs. But we won't stop there. We are going to go to a special forest, one of the last old growth pockets in all of Atlanta, and then to a food forest designed to grow food for humans. And then we're going to step all the way back into geological time. Yep, the history of rocks. So come on with me and let's go see Atlanta as it naturally is. Man, the light in this forest is so different than out on the street. It's just a little darker as the sunlight gets filtered through the leaves. And it's cooler. Boy, it feels good. Hey, there's Eli. Let's go meet him. Hey, Eli.
Hey, Jonah. How's it going?
Hey, I always like meeting you out in the forest.
Yeah, this is a great spot to meet.
Yeah, so thanks for spending a little time with us. This forest is known as a old growth forest.
Correct.
So can you kind of define that for us?
In this region, in the Piedmont region of Georgia, I'd say, trees in the range of 200 to 300 years old, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger. That's definitely a key component. But really what makes old growth truly special is no history of logging, no history of large-scale farming, clear-cutting, soil disturbance, that sort of thing.
Before you started working here, I remember looking at this forest and seeing it totally covered with English ivy, which I know is not a native species, wisteria,
Correct.
which is not a native species, privet, which is not a native species. But now when I look around, I don't see any of that. What's been happening? How is it looking so I don't know, the way it should be maybe?
Right, yeah, that's a great question because a lot of people see green in an area and they think green is good. Mm-hmm. If I see a hillside covered in green, they don't necessarily know what the species are there and what kind of good or harm they could be doing. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that green in and of itself is not necessarily good. What makes an ecosystem healthy is biodiversity. Mm-hmm. So many different types of living organisms, plants, animals, talking about insects, fungi, all sorts of things. Well, we had an infestation of invasive plants, non-native invasive plants. We had a survey done by an ecologist from Rutgers about 10 years ago. And he said, the forest is green, it's lush, it's dying.
Whoa.
That's his direct quote, really stuck with me and with the organization. So at that point, we decided we need to quite literally save this forest. And to do that, the first thing we need to do is inventory what we have, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, and then start removing the harmful invasive plants that you mentioned, like English ivy, Chinese wisteria, Chinese privet, different things like that. So as we remove that, we're starting to see the native species come back and thrive.
Interesting, but when you say come back, they don't migrate in. Where do these native species come from?
Good point. So I will say, common thought is plants don't move, right?
Well, yeah, they're just rooted in the ground.
They're rooted in the ground. But in fact, they do migrate over generations, right? Their seeds move.
Okay.
So wind, water, sometimes humans, maybe our boots might bring in seeds. So seeds can certainly move in and out of areas. So to figure out what is here and how it got here, that's a tricky question. We know that there are beneficial native seeds in the soil here. So my view as an ecologist and a restoration ecologist in restoring this forest is give those seeds a chance. So we do very little replanting here. Most of what we do is freeing up the land, the earth, from these invasive plants to allow the native seeds to germinate and thrive.
Interesting. Well, let's go on a walk and let's find a couple cool things out here.
Let's do it.
Eli, I just want to like ask you to ID everything out in this forest.
Well, I don't know if I could ID everything.
Well, okay, fair enough.
So Jonah, I've got a tree
Yeah.
that I want to show you. It's one of my favorites in the forest right here.
Okay, so what kind is it?
So this is an American beech. I can tell by the smoothish gray bark, very indicative of this particular species. And in the summer, you can tell by the leaves as well. They have simple leaves that have just a little slight serrations on the edge.
Very cool. I think I've heard of this one. In the wintertime, even though they're deciduous, they keep their dry leaves on them all winter?
They do. In fact, they are the last trees to lose their leaves. So sometimes you'll even find new leaves on a tree that still has a couple of last year's leaves that are, of course, brown, hanging on there.
Yeah. So I know that you're into champion trees, which means the biggest tree of its species, but is this a champion?
So this, as large as this tree is, and as special as it is, it's actually not a champion tree. A champion is the largest individual of its species in a given area. So there's a few qualifiers. You need to narrow it down to species. So in this case, we're talking about American beech. And the list that I am most involved with is the Atlanta Champion Tree List, which is through Trees Atlanta. So I volunteer with them and keep a tally of all the largest trees inside of the I-285 perimeter.
Gotcha. But this is not one of the largest. But people are going to ask, Eli, how old is it? Because,
yes.
Okay. Do you know?
No, but
What?
I can definitely give you an educated guess.
Okay. All right. Good.
So trees depend on a number of things to grow, as most people know. They need sunlight, they need water, they need air, and they also provide services for us like cleaning the air. But to know how old a tree is, you kind of need to know a little bit of the history of what was around this tree and what were the conditions like as it was growing and as it was maturing. Now we have some insight here in Fernbank Forest because there's fairly good records of recent human history. But we don't know, every tree that fell and when it fell in this area and things like that. I will say that in my experience studying forests around Atlanta and across Georgia, it seems to me that light is the biggest factor in tree growth.
Oh, I think I'm putting this together. So when I first arrived in Fernbank, I noticed how dark it was here. This tree hasn't been getting as much light as some other trees, has it?
Right. And in fact, we've seen some small beech trees, one in particular that came down in a storm.
Yeah.
And I've got a sample here that's about the same size as the beech tree I'm referring to.
This is just a baby.
This is, well, at first glance, it looks like just a baby. It's about 2 inches diameter across the stem. This one is about 30 years old.
Hold on, this little thing?
This is 30 years old.
Hold on, if this is 30 years old, I'm now starting to think about this one.
Now you can't exactly extrapolate, the diameter of this compared to this and then multiply, but it gives you an idea of what's happening. This tree was growing in an area of the forest that had very little sunlight. So it's putting on very little wood each year and it's spending energy growing that way, not that way. Yeah. Because the light is there, right, at the top of the canopy. And these little beech trees will sit in the understory waiting for what we call a release event, which would be when a big tree falls near it. Because what's going to happen to the canopy when a big tree comes down?
There's sunlight all of a sudden.
Boom, all of a sudden there's a hole in that umbrella, right?
Yeah.
There's a big hole and a lot more sun.
Yeah.
So when a tree does fall, a lot of times if it's across the path, we will cut and remove the section on the path. We leave all the dead wood here to provide habitat, but it gives us an opportunity to count the rings.
Yeah.
And you can see patterns in the growth. Very tight rings means slow growth. Very big rings means that tree was getting a lot of sunlight and water and everything it needs, so it was growing a lot faster during those times.
So can you venture a guess on this one?
I can venture a guess.
I know you're a scientist, so guesses are not the best thing.
Right. I would easily say this tree is 100, probably close to 200 years old. Wow. And it could certainly be more.
So older than the city of Atlanta.
It definitely could be older than the city of
Wow.
Atlanta.
Wow.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
Thanks for showing me. And even though it's not a champion, I see why it's one of your favorites now.
Oh yeah, love it, love it. If this tree could tell stories, right? 200 years.
All right, we're driving away from one of the first planned suburbs in Atlanta, Druid Hills, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Atlanta as well. And now we're in Lakewood Heights. Where I'm bringing you is called an urban food forest. And it looks like we're here right now. This is one of the solutions to the food desert. And it's a great natural area for us to explore. Here we are. Let's go. Now here's some food we can eat. These are common plums, and when there's unripe plums in the tree, it's best to look down. And we'll oftentimes find ripe plums that have fallen and that we can eat. So the urban food forest asks that we not just go around picking food from the trees and bushes anytime we want to. Instead, they ask that you come to a special harvest day where you can volunteer and then bring home some of the produce. But with a plum that's fallen on the ground, I'm gonna give it a try. Delicious. And now let's go see what else we can find in this amazing urban food forest. Now think back to what Eli showed us about Fernbank Forest. And now let's look around at the urban food forest here at Browns Mill. What are the differences? What can we tell about the history of this land? Well, we know that it used to be a farm. And we can tell that it used to be a farm because, well, the trees around us are fairly small. It's a new growth forest. Also, because there was so much more sunlight that hit that cleared farmland, you have lots of invasive species that have kind of taken over the forest floor. But you can also see signs of the farm itself, because this giant tree right here is a pecan tree. Not one that would typically grow in an old growth forest like this, but one that a farmer would definitely want to plant for those wonderful pecan nuts. And today, you have volunteers from all over the city helping to transform this former farmland into a food forest. And there's a sign of it right here next to me. So this blueberry plant was planted as a way to kind of reclaim the forest as the way a natural forest would be, but also with a focus on food for the people. And we have delicious blueberries that will soon be ripe that volunteers will be able to come, pick, and eat. Let's walk around this forest a little bit more and marvel at how beautiful it is and know that it has a past history and a future history. The focus may be on food, but this is still a fantastic forest to go on a hike in. One sign of a healthy forest is the birds. If you plant a food forest for humans, you're also planting a food forest for animals. And just walking around the forest today, I've heard northern cardinals, Carolina wren, red-eyed vireo, red-bellied woodpecker, blue jays. It is a thriving forest for the birds, which also means the forest is beginning to thrive for mammals and humans. This is one of my favorite parts of the food forest. This area has been designed to model what actual forest would be like. Now, if you think back to our time in Fernbank Forest, in the old growth, you have layers in a forest. You have the giant canopy trees. You have understory trees, trees that are a little smaller. You have shrubs, bushes, and you have the small herbaceous plants on the forest floor. Well, here at the urban food forest, we also have layers planted. Do you remember those pecan trees we saw earlier? Those are canopy trees that also produce nuts. There's also black walnuts here in this area of the food forest. Then, do you remember the plum trees? Those are understory trees that also produce fruit. The bush layer, the shrubs, well, think about blueberries. And then we get to that ground level where we are right now, and we have a whole area of strawberry plants growing on the forest floor, including this one right here that a squirrel picked. Not good to eat. And there's a layer that you may not even think of, the underground layer. And here in this area of the food forest, we have roots growing, like carrots, like onions, and like leeks. The idea of having layers to a food forest is a concept called permaculture. The idea with permaculture is to model our gardening, our landscaping, and our farming based upon how the natural world actually works. And when we walk around the urban food forest here at Browns Mill, we see that's exactly what they're doing. They're modeling this farm after the natural world. Fernbank Forest didn't need a lot of recovery, but this land did, and people are doing it right. Permaculture does refer to the land and the plants, but culture also refers to people. And it's really, really important that permaculture involves humans. Therefore, the community garden, a place for people to put their hands in the soil and grow food. This forest, this beautiful urban food forest, has given us a whole bunch of wisdom about how land can be reclaimed and turned into something that is both a community gathering space and a place to help solve the problem of food deserts. And now it's time to leave the urban food forest at Browns Mill and go find some more natural history.